That girl doesn't belong in first class. Someone needs to remove her immediately. The words cut through the luxurious cabin of Atlantic Elite Airways Flight 447 like a blade through silk. Victoria Reynolds, 49, draped in a $8,000 Armani blazer and dripping with diamonds, stood in the aisle pointing a perfectly manicured finger at seat 1A. Her voice carried the entitled authority of someone who had never been told no in her entire privileged life. The target of her outrage was Jasmine Carter, an 18-year-old college student wearing an oversized MIT hoodie, faded jeans, and pristine white sneakers. Jasmine sat quietly in the bulkhead suite, her laptop open, studying for upcoming finals, while simultaneously reviewing encrypted merger documents that would reshape the aviation industry. She wore noise-canceling headphones and hadn't heard Victoria's declaration of war. But everyone else had. Before we dive into this incredible story of hidden power and instant karma, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe that everyone, regardless of how they look or dress, deserves to be treated with basic human dignity, hit that subscribe button right now. This story will change how you see assumptions forever, and I guarantee you'll want to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because in exactly 22 minutes, Victoria Reynolds' entire world would shatter, and the quiet young woman she was targeting would prove that real power doesn't need to announce itself. It just acts. The setting was Tuesday, 3:45 p.m. at Miami International Airport. Atlantic Elite Airways Flight 447 to London Heathrow was scheduled to depart in 15 minutes. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 777-300ER represented the pinnacle of luxury air travel. Only 8 suites each, a private sanctuary with sliding doors, lie-flat beds, and personal service that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Victoria Reynolds had paid $18,000 for seat 2A, and she expected perfection. As the wife of pharmaceutical executive Richard Reynolds, she lived in a world where money bought not just comfort, but the right to exclude others. Her personal motto was, "Simple standards must be maintained." And those standards in her mind had everything to do with appearance breeding and knowing one's place. She had noticed Jasmine earlier in the premium lounge sitting in the corner with a battered backpack and a coffee-stained textbook. Victoria had complained to the lounge attendant then, but had been told the girl had verified access. Now, seeing Jasmine in the most coveted seat on the plane, her outrage had reached a boiling point. What Victoria didn't know was that Jasmine Carter was no ordinary college student. She was a sophomore at MIT, majoring in computer science with a focus on aviation logistics. More importantly, she was the daughter of Diana Carter, the CEO and majority owner of Atlantic Elite Airways. Diana had built the airline from a small regional carrier into a global powerhouse through sheer determination, brilliant strategy, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. Jasmine was traveling to London not for vacation, but on urgent business. The encrypted documents on her laptop contained details of a massive merger that would create the world's largest airline alliance. The information was too sensitive for digital transmission, requiring a hand-delivered briefcase that now sat locked beside her feet. Diana trusted her daughter completely, and Jasmine had never let her down. But Jasmine traveled incognito. No security detail, no special treatment, no designer clothes. She wanted to experience the world as a normal teenager, not as the heir to a billion-dollar empire. Her mother respected this choice, believing it would make Jasmine a better leader when her time came. Neither of them had anticipated Victoria Reynolds. The first-class cabin was filling up with the usual mix of business executives, celebrities, and old-money aristocrats. In seat 1F sat Thomas Anderson, a 38-year-old tech entrepreneur who had just closed a $200 million deal in Miami. Seat 2C belonged to Maria Gonzalez, a 33-year-old investment banker known for her sharp mind and sharper tongue. Both had noticed Victoria's aggressive posture and were quietly recording the incident on their phones. The cabin crew was equally impressive. Miguel Santos, 35, served as chief flight attendant. He was a 12-year veteran of Atlantic Elite, known for his professionalism and ability to handle difficult passengers. His team included Rachel Moore, 26, a junior flight attendant, who was still learning to navigate the complex politics of first-class service. At the controls sat Captain Elena Rodriguez, 42, one of the airline's most experienced pilots with over 15,000 hours of flight time. Miguel recognized Jasmine's name immediately when he saw the manifest. The notation next to her seat read VIP, Executive Family, Special Handling. He had flown with Diana Carter many times and knew that her daughter occasionally traveled alone, but he also knew the family's preference for discretion. His job was to ensure Jasmine's comfort without drawing attention to her identity. Victoria's job, apparently, was to make that impossible. "Excuse me," Miss Victoria said loudly, stepping closer to Jasmine's suite. "I think there's been a terrible mistake." Jasmine looked up, pulling one side of her headphones away from her ear. She saw a middle-aged woman in expensive clothes wearing an expression of barely contained rage. "I'm sorry, were you speaking to me?" "Yes, I was," Victoria replied, her voice dripping with condescension. "You're in the wrong section, dear. First class is for paying customers. Economy is back through that curtain past the bathrooms. Way back." Jasmine blinked, confused by the unprovoked hostility. She checked her boarding pass on her phone screen. "No, I'm in seat 1A. This is my assigned seat." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Don't play games with me. Look at yourself. Hoodie, backpack, college textbooks. This is an $18,000 seat. There is absolutely no way someone like you can afford to be here." "You're right," Jasmine said calmly, closing her laptop. "I didn't pay for this seat." Victoria's face lit up with vindictive triumph. "I knew it. You're either using a stolen boarding pass or you've scammed your way onto this aircraft. Security needs to remove you immediately." The cabin had gone quiet. Thomas Anderson lowered his Wall Street Journal. Maria Gonzalez stopped scrolling through her tablet. Even passengers in the business class section behind them were craning their necks to see what was happening. Victoria had successfully created exactly the kind of scene she claimed to be preventing. "Ma'am," Jasmine said, her voice steady despite the growing tension, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I have every right to be here." "Rights." Victoria laughed harshly. "Young lady, this isn't about rights. This is about reality. People like you simply don't belong in first class. You're making the other passengers uncomfortable." Thomas Anderson finally spoke up. "Actually, ma'am, the only person making anyone uncomfortable is you." Victoria whirled around to face him. "Excuse me, are you defending fraud?" "I'm defending common decency," Thomas replied evenly. "And from where I'm sitting, this young woman has done nothing wrong." Maria Gonzalez, who had been quietly filming the entire exchange, decided to add her voice. "She's been studying peacefully since she boarded. You're the one causing a disturbance." "How dare you?" Victoria snapped. "I pay premium prices to avoid exactly this situation. If airlines don't maintain standards, then what's the point of first class?" "The point," Jasmine said quietly, "is comfort and service, not excluding people based on how they look." Victoria's face turned red. "Don't lecture me about exclusion. This is about safety, security, and maintaining the integrity of premium service. Now gather your little backpack and move to your proper seat before I call for assistance." The confrontation was escalating rapidly. Other passengers were now openly watching some recording on their phones. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had shifted from peaceful luxury to tense drama. Victoria had successfully turned what should have been a routine boarding process into a public spectacle, and she was about to discover that spectacles in the age of social media and corporate accountability rarely ended well for the person creating them. Miguel Santos had been observing from the galley, hoping the situation would resolve itself. But Victoria's voice was getting louder, her accusations more serious, and her behavior increasingly disruptive. He couldn't ignore it any longer. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, stepping into the cabin with practiced calm, "we'll be beginning our departure preparations shortly. Please ensure your personal items are secured." It was a diplomatic way of telling everyone to sit down and stop filming. But Victoria wasn't interested in diplomacy. "Attendant," she called sharply, flagging Miguel down. "We have a serious problem here that requires immediate attention." Miguel approached with the professional smile that had served him well through countless difficult encounters. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Reynolds. How can I assist you today?" The fact that he knew her name wasn't surprising. Victoria Reynolds was a frequent flyer with a reputation among the crew. Her file included notes like, "High maintenance requires senior staff attention and tends to escalate minor issues." Miguel had dealt with her before, but never quite like this. "This girl," Victoria said, pointing dramatically at Jasmine, "admits she didn't pay for her ticket. She's clearly using fraudulent documents or stolen boarding passes. I demand her immediate removal from first class." Miguel glanced at his tablet where Jasmine's information was clearly displayed. "Mrs. Reynolds, I can confirm that Miss Carter has legitimate first-class passage." "That's impossible," Victoria insisted. "Just look at her. Does she look like she belongs here? Check your system again. There's obviously been a mistake or some kind of computer error." Jasmine remained silent, watching the exchange with growing concern. She could reveal her identity at any moment, but something held her back. Maybe it was curiosity about how far Victoria would take this. Maybe it was a desire to see if the crew would protect her without special treatment. Or maybe it was the realization that this moment would teach her something important about the world her mother had built. "Ma'am," Miguel said carefully, "our reservation computer is quite secure. Miss Carter's booking is legitimate." "Then someone hacked it," Victoria declared. "Or she's part of some kind of fraud ring. I read about these schemes online. They steal credit card information and book luxury travel. This is clearly a security issue." Thomas Anderson had heard enough. "Ma'am, you're making serious accusations without any evidence. This is harassment, plain and simple." Victoria spun around to face him again. "Sir, I don't know what your relationship is to this girl, but I won't be intimidated into silence. If you're not part of the problem, then stay out of it." "Actually," Thomas said, pulling out his phone, "I think I am part of the problem. Because I'm recording your behavior, and it's going to make a very interesting case study in discrimination." Victoria's eyes widened. "You're recording me? That's illegal." "No, ma'am," Miguel interjected. "Passengers are permitted to record in public areas of the aircraft, but perhaps we should lower our voices to avoid disturbing other passengers." "I'll lower my voice when this security threat is removed," Victoria snapped. "I'm calling corporate right now to report this incident." She pulled out her phone and began dialing. Miguel watched with growing concern. He knew that corporate calls about passenger disputes often escalated quickly, and he also knew that this particular passenger was not someone the airline could afford to antagonize. The VIP, executive family notation in Jasmine's file meant that any incident involving her would likely reach the highest levels of company leadership. This was about to become much bigger than a simple seating dispute. Victoria Reynolds stood in the aisle with her phone pressed against her ear, speaking in the loud, authoritative tone she reserved for subordinates and service workers. "Yes, this is Victoria Reynolds, Premium Frequent Flyer member. I need to report a serious security breach on Flight 447. Miguel Santos watched nervously as other passengers shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating drama. Rachel Moore, the junior flight attendant, emerged from the galley where she had been preparing pre-flight beverages. Her eyes went wide when she saw the confrontation in progress. "There's a young woman in first class who admits she didn't pay for her ticket." Victoria continued into the phone. "The flight crew is refusing to remove her despite clear evidence of fraud. I need immediate assistance." Jasmine Carter remained seated, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She had closed her laptop and put away her headphones, giving her full attention to the unfolding situation. Her mother had taught her that in moments of conflict, silence was often more powerful than words. Let others reveal their character through their actions. Mrs. Reynolds Miguel said quietly, approaching with his tablet in hand, "Perhaps I could show you Miss Carter's booking details to help resolve this misunderstanding." Victoria held up her free hand dismissively. "I don't need to see forged documents. The evidence is obvious. Just look at her appearance versus the cost of this seat." Thomas Anderson leaned forward in his suite. "Ma'am, what exactly does someone need to look like to afford first class?" "You know exactly what I mean," Victoria replied sharply. "Standards, presentation, the kind of background that comes with serious money." "And what background is that Maria Gonzalez?" asked, her phone clearly visible as she continued recording. Her live stream had attracted over 2,000 viewers in the past few minutes, with comments flooding in from around the world. Victoria's phone conversation with customer service was becoming increasingly heated. "No, I will not calm down. This is a federal security issue. Yes, I understand you need to verify information, but this girl has already admitted she didn't pay." Rachel Moore approached Jasmine's seat with genuine concern. As the newest member of the crew, she was still learning how to navigate complex passenger situations. "Miss Carter, is there anything I can do to help resolve this?" "I'm fine, thank you," Jasmine replied with a gentle smile. "I understand this woman's concerns, but I assure you my presence here is completely legitimate." Victoria overheard and immediately ended her phone call. "Concerns? These aren't concerns, these are facts. And the fact is that you're occupying a seat under false pretenses." She stepped closer to Jasmine's suite, her voice rising again. "I've been flying first class for over 20 years. I know who belongs here and who doesn't. You're clearly out of your element." "Define belonging," Jasmine said calmly, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. The simple question hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria sputtered for a moment, clearly not expecting such a composed response. "I mean, look around you." Victoria gestured at the luxurious cabin. "These seats cost more than most people make in a month. The passengers here are business leaders, investors, people of substance, not college students with backpacks." "I see." Jasmine nodded thoughtfully. "So, in your opinion, age and appearance determine someone's right to comfort?" Thomas Anderson smiled, despite the tension. The young woman was handling herself with remarkable grace under pressure. "That's a fair question. I'd like to hear the answer, too." Victoria's face flushed red. "This isn't a philosophy debate. This is about security protocols and maintaining standards. Miguel, I demand you check her identification and credit card used for booking." Miguel looked uncomfortable. Company policy protected passenger privacy, and he couldn't share booking details with other passengers. "Mrs. Reynolds, I cannot disclose other passengers' personal information, but I can confirm that all passengers in first class have been properly verified." "That's not good enough," Victoria snapped. "If you won't do your job, I'll call someone who will." She dialed again, this time calling the airline's executive customer service line. As a platinum member with significant annual spending, she had access to senior management representatives. "This is Victoria Reynolds, account number 7794 Alpha. I need to speak with a supervisor immediately regarding a security breach on Flight 447. The conversation was clearly audible to everyone in first class. Maria Gonzalez's live stream now had over 5,000 viewers, with comments ranging from supportive to outraged. The hashtag #FirstClassDiscrimination was beginning to trend. While Victoria was on the phone, Thomas Anderson decided to introduce himself to Jasmine. "Hi there, I'm Thomas. I'm sorry you're dealing with this nonsense." "Jasmine," she replied, shaking his offered hand. "And thank you. Though I have to say this is unfortunately not my first experience with assumptions based on appearance. That's disappointing to hear, Thomas said. For what it's worth, you're handling this with more class than some Fortune 500 CEOs I know. Maria Gonzalez chimed in from across the aisle. Absolutely. My viewers are incredibly impressed with your composure. This woman is making a complete fool of herself on camera. Victoria, overhearing the conversation, became even more agitated. Are you people insane? She's the one who doesn't belong here, and you're treating her like some kind of victim? Ma'am, Rachel Moore said gently. Perhaps we could discuss this more privately. Other passengers are trying to prepare for departure. No, Victoria shouted, causing several passengers to jump. This is exactly the problem. Everyone wants to ignore the issue instead of addressing it. I will not be silenced. Her phone call was being transferred to a senior supervisor, and she was placed on hold. The waiting music was audible to the entire cabin, adding an almost surreal quality to the confrontation. Miguel realized the situation was spiraling beyond his control. He stepped closer to Jasmine and spoke quietly. Miss Carter, I sincerely apologize for this disturbance. Is there anything specific I can do to make you more comfortable? Actually, yes, Jasmine replied, surprising him. Could you ensure that your crew receives proper training on unconscious bias? This kind of incident suggests there might be broader issues with how passengers are perceived and treated. Miguel nodded slowly. It was an insightful observation from someone who was supposedly just a college student. That's a very thoughtful suggestion. I'll make sure it reaches the appropriate people. Victoria finally got through to a supervisor. Yes, thank you for taking my call. I'm on flight 447 and there's a passenger in first class who clearly doesn't belong here. She admits she didn't pay, she's dressed inappropriately, and the crew is protecting her instead of removing her. The supervisor's voice was calm and professional. Mrs. Reynolds, can you provide the passenger's name and seat number? Her name is apparently Jasmine Carter, and she's in seat 1A, the most expensive seat on the plane, which she clearly cannot afford. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Victoria assumed the supervisor was looking up the booking details. Mrs. Reynolds, I'm showing that passenger Carter has legitimate first-class passage. Her booking was made through our corporate account computer. Corporate account? Victoria frowned. What kind of corporate account? Another pause. I'm sorry, but I cannot provide specific details about other passengers' bookings. However, I can confirm that everything is in order. Victoria's frustration was reaching a boiling point. This is ridiculous. Someone is covering this up. I want to speak with your manager. Ma'am, I am the senior supervisor for premium passenger services. If you continue to disrupt the flight, we may need to consider alternative arrangements for your travel. The threat was subtle but clear. Victoria could be removed from the flight if her behavior continued to escalate. But instead of backing down, she became even more aggressive. Are you threatening me? I spend over $200,000 annually with this airline. I will not be intimidated into accepting security breaches. Thomas Anderson had heard enough. Ma'am, the only security issue here is your behavior. You're disturbing every passenger in first class based on nothing but assumptions. Assumptions? Victoria laughed harshly. Look at the evidence. Student ID casual clothes admit she didn't pay. What more do you need? I need proof of wrongdoing, Thomas replied firmly. And you've provided none. Maria Gonzalez looked up from her phone. My viewers have some interesting comments. Apparently, several people recognize this young woman from MIT news articles. She's some kind of academic prodigy. Victoria scoffed. Academic prodigy? Even if that's true, it doesn't explain how she's in first class. Maybe Jasmine said quietly, it's time you stopped trying to explain my presence and started examining your own assumptions. The comment hit its target. Victoria's face turned an even deeper shade of red and her voice became shrill with indignation. How dare you lecture me? I have every right to question suspicious activity. This isn't about assumptions, it's about security and standards. Whose security? Jasmine asked. And whose standards? The questions were simple, but they cut to the heart of the matter. Victoria was clearly struggling to articulate an answer that didn't sound discriminatory. Miguel's radio crackled softly. Captain Rodriguez was requesting an update on the passenger situation. The flight was now delayed, and other passengers were becoming increasingly frustrated with the disruption. Mrs. Reynolds Miguel said diplomatically, "Our captain needs to begin pre-flight procedures. Perhaps we could continue this conversation after takeoff." "Absolutely not," Victoria declared. "This issue gets resolved now, or I'm not flying today." And neither should she. It was an ultimatum that would force the crew to choose sides. Miguel realized he needed backup and fast. He pressed his call button for the captain's assistance. This situation was beyond what he could handle alone. In the galley, Rachel Moore was nervously preparing drinks, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to process what she was witnessing. She had never seen a passenger confrontation escalate to this level, and she wasn't sure how to respond. The other first-class passengers were growing increasingly uncomfortable. Some were recording the incident, others were making phone calls to friends and colleagues. The luxury cabin that was supposed to provide a peaceful escape from the world had become the center of a very public drama. And through it all, Jasmine Carter sat calmly in seat 1A, watching Victoria Reynolds destroy her own reputation one accusation at a time. She could have ended the confrontation with a single phone call to her mother. But something told her that this moment was bigger than just her personal comfort. This was about principles, about dignity, about the kind of airline her mother had built and the kind of people it served. Victoria Reynolds was about to learn a very expensive lesson about assuming she knew who held the real power in the room. Captain Elena Rodriguez received Miguel's call for assistance just as she was completing her final computer's check. A passenger dispute in first class was serious enough, but the fact that it was escalating during boarding made it a potential safety issue. She unbuckled her harness and made her way toward the cabin, unaware that she was about to walk into a confrontation that would become a case study in crisis management for years to come. Captain Elena Rodriguez stepped into the first-class cabin with the commanding presence that had earned her respect throughout the aviation industry. At 42, she had over 15,000 hours of flight time and had handled everything from medical emergencies to severe weather. But passenger disputes required a different kind of skill set, one that balanced authority with diplomacy. The scene that greeted her was unlike anything she had encountered in her career. Victoria Reynolds stood in the center aisle, phone in one hand, pointing at Jasmine Carter with the other, while multiple passengers recorded the confrontation. The luxury cabin felt charged with tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Rodriguez announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I'm Captain Rodriguez. I understand we have a passenger concern that needs immediate attention." Victoria immediately seized on the captain's presence. "Finally, Captain, we have a serious security breach. This girl admits she didn't pay for her ticket, and your crew is refusing to remove her." Captain Rodriguez looked at Miguel, who handed her his tablet displaying the passenger manifest. She quickly scanned Jasmine's information, noting the VIP, Executive Family Designation. Her expression remained neutral, but internally she recognized the gravity of the situation. Miss Carter, the captain, addressed Jasmine directly. "Are you experiencing any issues with your seating or service?" "No, ma'am," Jasmine replied respectfully. "I've been studying quietly since I boarded." This passenger began questioning my presence based on my appearance. Victoria interrupted angrily. "Based on obvious evidence. Look at her then. Look at this cabin. She doesn't belong here." Captain Rodriguez turned her full attention to Victoria, her tone becoming notably cooler. "Ma'am, I need you to explain what specific security threat you believe this passenger represents." "She admitted she didn't pay for the ticket," Victoria exclaimed. "That's theft of services fraud, whatever you want to call it." "I said I didn't pay for it personally," Jasmine clarified calmly. The ticket was purchased by my family's company account. Company account? Victoria scoffed. What company would pay $18,000 for a student's ticket? Thomas Anderson looked up from his phone where he had been doing some quick research. Actually, that's an interesting question. Jasmine, I just looked you up online. You're the youngest person ever accepted into MIT's Advanced Computer Science program, right? Jasmine nodded modestly. I've been fortunate to have some opportunities. Opportunities, Thomas continued reading from his screen. You developed a logistics algorithm that improved cargo efficiency by 30%. That's not an opportunity, that's genius-level innovation. Victoria's confidence wavered slightly. That doesn't explain anything. Students don't travel in first class no matter how smart they are. Captain Rodriguez had been listening carefully. The situation was becoming clearer, and she realized she needed to de-escalate before it went any further. Mrs. Reynolds, Miss Carter's booking is legitimate. I'm going to ask you to return to your seat so we can begin departure procedures. No, Victoria said firmly. I will not sit next to someone who's clearly engaged in fraud. Either she moves or I want a full refund and a seat on the next flight. Ma'am, Captain Rodriguez said, her voice taking on a warning tone, you are disrupting flight operations. I need you to comply with crew instructions immediately. Victoria's phone rang. It was the customer service supervisor calling back. She answered immediately, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. Yes, I'm still here. The situation has gotten worse. Now the captain is protecting the fraudulent passenger too. I think there might be a cover-up happening. Captain Rodriguez exchanged glances with Miguel. Accusations of cover-ups were serious and could trigger federal investigations. This needed to stop immediately. Mrs. Reynolds, the captain, said firmly, I need you to end that call and take your seat, or you'll be removed from this aircraft. Victoria's eyes widened with shock. You're threatening to remove me? I'm the victim here. I'm the one reporting a security issue. Maria Gonzalez looked up from her live stream, which now had over 10,000 viewers. Ma'am, you've been harassing this young woman for 20 minutes based on nothing but her appearance. The only security issue here is your behavior. How dare you? Victoria spun around to face Maria. You don't know what you're talking about. Actually, I do, Maria replied evenly. I work in corporate security, and what you're doing would be considered discriminatory harassment in any professional setting. Victoria was becoming increasingly desperate as she realized the passengers were all siding against her. This is insane. You're all being manipulated by someone who clearly doesn't belong here. Thomas Anderson stood up, his 6-foot frame commanding attention. Ma'am, I've heard enough. I'm a venture capitalist. I've funded dozens of tech startups. I know talent when I see it, and this young woman has accomplished more by age 18 than most people do in their entire careers. I don't care what she's accomplished, Victoria shouted. Accomplishments don't buy first-class tickets. Actually, Jasmine said quietly, they often do. The simple statement hung in the air. Victoria stared at Jasmine, trying to process what she meant. Captain Rodriguez decided to try a different approach. Mrs. Reynolds, what would it take to resolve this situation to your satisfaction? Victoria thought for a moment, her expression crafty. I want to see proof of payment. Credit card receipts, bank statements, whatever was used to buy her ticket. If she can prove legitimate payment, I'll apologize. That's confidential passenger information, Miguel interjected. We cannot share booking details. Then we have a problem, Victoria declared. Because I'm not sitting next to a fraud, Captain Rodriguez made a decision. She pulled out her phone and stepped aside to make a call. Victoria assumed she was calling security to remove Jasmine, but the conversation that followed would change everything. This is Captain Rodriguez on Flight 447. I need to speak with executive management about a passenger situation. Yes, it involves the VIP passenger in 1A. No, she's not the problem. It's another passenger making accusations. Victoria's face lit up with triumph. Finally, someone was taking her concerns seriously at the executive level. but Captain Rodriguez's expression was becoming increasingly concerned as she listened to the voice on the other end. After a few minutes, she hung up and approached Victoria with a grim look. "Mrs. Reynolds, I've just spoken with our corporate security team. They're very interested in this incident." "Good," Victoria said smugly. "I knew someone would eventually take this seriously." "Oh, they're taking it very seriously," Captain Rodriguez replied. "But not the way you think." Victoria's smile faded. "What do you mean?" Miguel's radio crackled. "Chief Flight Attendant, please report to the cockpit for an urgent message." As Miguel hurried away, Captain Rodriguez continued addressing Victoria. "Ma'am, corporate has informed me that this incident is being escalated to the highest levels of company management." "Excellent," Victoria said, regaining her confidence. "Maybe now we'll get some action." Thomas Anderson was still reading on his phone. "This is fascinating," he said, looking up at Jasmine. "You're not just any MIT student. You're working on aviation logistics specifically. Your research papers are cited by major airlines." "It's important work," Jasmine replied modestly. "The industry can always improve efficiency and service." Victoria was growing frustrated with the academic discussion. "I don't care if she's the next Einstein. That doesn't give her the right to steal services. Nobody's stealing anything," Maria Gonzalez said, still live streaming. "My viewers have done some research too. This young woman comes from a prominent family in the aviation industry." Victoria's confidence wavered again. "What kind of family? The kind that probably knows more about airline operations than you do?" Thomas answered. Miguel returned from the cockpit, his face pale. He whispered something to Captain Rodriguez, who nodded grimly. "Mrs. Reynolds, Captain Rodriguez said I need to inform you that this incident has now reached the personal attention of our company's ownership." "Ownership?" Victoria frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Captain Rodriguez said carefully, "that the people who own this airline are now aware that you've spent the past 30 minutes harassing a passenger based solely on her appearance." Victoria's face went white. For the first time since the confrontation began, she seemed to realize that she might be in serious trouble. I was just concerned about security," she stammered. "Ma'am, Captain Rodriguez said what you've described as security concerns would be classified as discrimination by any reasonable standard." The cabin fell silent. Even the passengers who had been recording stopped to listen to the captain's words. Now Captain Rodriguez continued. "I'm going to give you one opportunity to apologize to Miss Carter and return to your seat quietly. If you choose not to take that opportunity, you'll be removed from this aircraft and permanently banned from flying with Atlantic Elite Airways." Victoria stared at the captain in shock. "You can't be serious. I'm a platinum member. I spend hundreds of thousands with this airline." "Mrs. Reynolds," Captain Rodriguez said firmly, "no amount of money gives you the right to harass other passengers." Victoria looked around the cabin searching for support. Every passenger was staring at her with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. Her phone was still recording her customer service call, and she suddenly realized that her conversation was being documented by airline representatives. The walls were closing in, and she could feel her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. But instead of backing down, Victoria's sense of entitlement pushed her to make one final, devastating mistake. "I demand to speak with the owner of this airline," she declared. "Someone needs to explain why paying customers are being threatened while fraudulent passengers are protected." Captain Rodriguez and Miguel exchanged glances. The captain pulled out her phone again. "As you wish, Mrs. Reynolds. Let me see if the owner is available to speak with you." Victoria smiled triumphantly, certain that once she spoke to the owner directly, they would understand her position and remove Jasmine immediately. She had no idea that her wish was about to be granted in the most humiliating way possible. As Captain Rodriguez dialed, Jasmine's phone vibrated with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen, saw Mom displayed, and quietly answered. "Hi, Mom," Jasmine said softly. "Yes, there's been an incident on the flight." Victoria didn't notice the coincidence of timing. She was too focused on her upcoming conversation with the airline's owner, confident that she was finally going to get the satisfaction she demanded. In exactly 3 minutes, Victoria Reynolds would discover that sometimes getting exactly what you ask for is the worst thing that can happen to you. Victoria Reynolds stood in the first-class aisle with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for her actions. She truly believed that speaking with the airline's owner would vindicate her position and result in Jasmine's removal. After all, she was a platinum member who spent nearly $300,000 annually with Atlantic Elite Airways. Surely, ownership would side with a valuable customer over some random college student. "Yes, I'll hold for the owner," Victoria said into her phone, speaking to the customer service supervisor. "Finally, someone with real authority will sort this mess out." Captain Rodriguez had stepped aside to coordinate with ground control about the delay, leaving Miguel to monitor the situation. The chief flight attendant was growing increasingly nervous as he watched Victoria's confidence build. He knew something she didn't, and it was making him physically uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Jasmine Carter sat quietly in seat 1A, speaking softly into her own phone. "Mom, the situation is getting out of hand. This passenger has been harassing me for over 30 minutes, and now she's demanding to speak with you directly." Thomas Anderson and Maria Gonzalez had both noticed that Jasmine was on a phone call, but they couldn't hear her conversation over Victoria's loud demands. Maria's live stream had exploded to over 25,000 viewers, with comments flooding in from around the world. The hashtag first-class discrimination was trending globally. "This is incredible," Maria whispered to Thomas. "My viewers are posting screenshots of this woman's social media. She has a history of complaints about service workers and minorities." "Not surprising," Thomas replied, shaking his head. "I've seen this behavior in corporate boardrooms. People who believe their money makes them superior to others." Victoria overheard fragments of their conversation and whirled around angrily. "Are you people still recording me? This is harassment," Ma'am Thomas said evenly. "You're in a public space engaged in discriminatory behavior. Documentation is appropriate." "Discriminatory." Victoria's voice rose to near shrieking levels. "This has nothing to do with discrimination. This is about security and proper procedures." "What security threat does she pose?" Maria asked, still filming. "Please explain it to my 25,000 viewers." Victoria's face turned red. She admitted she didn't pay. "She's dressed inappropriately. She doesn't belong in this cabin." "And why doesn't she belong?" Thomas pressed. "What specific criteria are you using?" Victoria struggled to answer without sounding overtly racist. It's obvious. Look at the cost of these seats compared to her presentation." "Her presentation?" Jasmine spoke up, her voice calm but carrying an edge for the first time. "Could you elaborate on what's wrong with my presentation?" Victoria gestured wildly. "Hoodies, sneakers, backpack, student ID. This isn't appropriate attire for first class." I see Jasmine nodded thoughtfully. "So you believe there's a dress code for first class that excludes casual clothing?" "Yes, exactly," Victoria exclaimed, relieved that someone finally understood her point. "Interesting," Jasmine continued, "because I've been in first class many times wearing similar clothes and I've never been told there was a dress code." Victoria's triumph deflated slightly. "Many times? How many times has someone your age been in first class?" "More than you might think," Jasmine replied cryptically. Captain Rodriguez returned from her consultation with ground control. The flight was now 45 minutes delayed, and other passengers throughout the aircraft were becoming restless. She needed to resolve this situation immediately. "Mrs. Reynolds," the captain announced, "I have good news. The owner is available to speak with you directly." Victoria's face lit up with vindictive satisfaction. "Wonderful. Finally, someone with real authority who understands the value of premium customers. There's just one small detail," Captain Rodriguez continued. The owner prefers to handle these conversations in person, rather than over the phone. Victoria frowned. In person? How is that possible? We're on an aircraft. She's requested that you step off the plane to meet with her privately, Captain Rodriguez explained. She? Victoria asked, surprised. The owner is a woman? Yes. Diana Carter, CEO and majority owner of Atlantic Elite Airways. She's actually here at Miami International today and can meet with you immediately. Victoria's confidence reached new heights. A female CEO would surely understand her concerns about maintaining standards and security. Perfect. Let's go meet her right now. What Victoria didn't notice was that Jasmine had ended her phone call and was watching the exchange with an expression that might have been amusement if the situation weren't so serious. However, Captain Rodriguez's continued company policy requires that passengers who request owner meetings must disembark for the conversation. You would need to take a later flight. Victoria hesitated for a moment, weighing her options. She could stay on the flight and continue arguing with crew members, or she could disembark and state her case directly to the owner. Her sense of righteousness won out. Fine. I'll speak with Diana Carter directly. She needs to know what kind of security issues her airline is facing. Miguel stepped forward. Mrs. Reynolds, I should mention that these owner meetings are typically recorded for quality assurance purposes. Even better, Victoria declared. I want this conversation documented. When Ms. Carter hears what happened, heads are going to roll. Captain Rodriguez picked up the cabin phone and made an announcement to the entire aircraft. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief delay due to a passenger services issue that needs to be resolved before departure. We appreciate your patience. In economy and business class, passengers were growing frustrated with the delay. Many were texting friends and family about the holdup. Some had heard raised voices from first class and were speculating about the cause. Thomas Anderson looked up from his phone with a concerned expression. Captain, how long do you expect this delay to last? I have a critical meeting in London. Sir, we should be able to resolve this very quickly once Mrs. Reynolds disembarks. Captain Rodriguez replied diplomatically. Victoria's customer service call was still connected. The supervisor had been listening to the entire conversation and was frantically taking notes. This kind of incident involving VIP passengers required immediate escalation to executive management. Ma'am, the supervisor said through Victoria's phone, I have corporate security on the line. They'd like to speak with you before you meet with Ms. Carter. Corporate security, Victoria frowned. Why would security be involved? Standard procedure for passenger disputes involving harassment allegations, the supervisor explained. Harassment? Victoria's voice became shrill again. I'm the one being harassed. This girl doesn't belong here and everyone is protecting her. Jasmine finally spoke up again, her voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed to cut through Victoria's hysteria. Mrs. Reynolds, what if I told you that you're absolutely right about one thing? Victoria spun around, surprised by the comment. What do you mean? You're right that I'm not like other passengers in first class, Jasmine said carefully. I don't fit the typical profile. Victoria's eyes lit up with vindication. Finally, you're admitting you don't belong here. No, Jasmine replied calmly. I'm saying I'm not typical because I actually understand how this airline operates. I know the policies, the procedures, and the people who make the important decisions. Something in Jasmine's tone made Victoria pause. For the first time, she looked at the young woman not as a target, but as a potential threat. What exactly are you saying? Victoria asked warily. Before Jasmine could answer, Miguel's radio crackled with an urgent message from ground control. He listened for a moment, then approached Captain Rodriguez with a worried expression. Captain, I need to speak with you privately, Miguel said. They stepped into the galley where Miguel delivered a message that made Captain Rodriguez close her eyes and take a deep breath. When they returned to the cabin, the captain's demeanor had changed completely. She was no longer trying to de-escalate the situation. She was preparing for damage control. "Mrs. Reynolds," Captain Rodriguez announced, "there's been a change in plans. Ms. Carter will be coming aboard to speak with you here." Victoria looked confused. "She's coming aboard. That seems highly unusual." "Ma'am," Captain Rodriguez said carefully, "Diana Carter owns this aircraft. She can board whenever she chooses." The first-class cabin fell silent. Even Victoria seemed to sense that something significant was happening, though she couldn't quite grasp what it meant. Thomas Anderson was staring at his phone with a shocked expression. "Holy shit," he whispered, then caught himself. "Sorry, this is incredible." What Maria asked still live-streaming. "I just looked up Diana Carter," Thomas said, his voice filled with awe. "She's not just the owner of Atlantic Elite Airways. She's one of the most powerful women in aviation. Built this airline from nothing into a global powerhouse." Victoria waved dismissively. "I don't care how successful she is. She needs to know about this security issue." "Ma'am," Thomas said slowly, "you might want to reconsider your approach here." "Why?" Victoria demanded. Thomas looked at Jasmine, then back at Victoria. "Because Diana Carter is... well, she's not going to be sympathetic to complaints about other passengers based on appearance." "What does that mean?" Victoria asked. Maria Gonzalez lowered her phone for a moment. "Mrs. Reynolds, Diana Carter is a black woman who built her airline empire despite facing exactly the kind of discrimination you've been displaying today." The color drained from Victoria's face. That's not relevant. This isn't about race." "Isn't it?" Jasmine asked quietly. "You've questioned my presence based solely on my appearance. You've assumed I don't belong here because of how I look. What would you call that?" Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She was beginning to realize the hole she had dug for herself, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. "I call it security consciousness," Victoria said weakly. "Anyone would have the same concerns." "Would they?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "Because in 15 years of flying, I've never seen a passenger harass another passenger for 45 minutes based on clothing choices." Miguel stepped forward with his tablet. "Mrs. Reynolds, I've been reviewing our passenger satisfaction data. In the past year, we've had over 50,000 passengers under age 25 fly first class. None of them have been questioned about their right to be here. Victoria was trapped and she knew it. Every argument she made sounded worse than the last. But instead of apologizing and trying to salvage the situation, her entitlement pushed her to make one final catastrophic error." "Fine," Victoria declared. "I want to speak with Diana Carter immediately. When I explain what happened, she'll understand that I was protecting her airline's reputation." Captain Rodriguez picked up the cabin phone again. "Ms. Carter, Mrs. Reynolds is ready to speak with you." "Ms. Carter." Victoria looked confused. "I thought she was coming aboard." "She is," Captain Rodriguez replied. "She's been on the plane for the past 10 minutes listening to everything that's been said." Victoria's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, listening?" Said a new voice from the entrance to first class. "I've heard every word of your 45-minute harassment of my daughter." Victoria turned around to see Diana Carter walking into the cabin. At 45, Diana was an elegant, powerfully built woman who commanded attention without raising her voice. She wore a perfectly tailored Navy business suit and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had never needed to prove her worth to anyone. But it was her next words that destroyed Victoria's world completely. "Mrs. Reynolds," Diana said, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "I believe you wanted to speak with the owner." Victoria stared at Diana, then at Jasmine, then back at Diana. The family resemblance was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. That's impossible, Victoria whispered. What's impossible? Diana asked. That my daughter flies in first class? Or that you've spent the better part of an hour harassing her based on the color of her skin and the clothes she's wearing? The cabin was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Every passenger was staring at Victoria, whose face had gone completely white. I didn't know, Victoria stammered. Didn't know what? Diana continued, her voice never rising above a conversational tone. That she was my daughter? Does that matter? Would your behavior have been acceptable if she was anyone else's daughter? Victoria's phone was still connected to customer service, and the supervisor was hearing every word. Corporate security was recording the conversation. Maria's live stream had exploded to over 100,000 viewers, and Victoria Reynolds was about to learn that there are some mistakes you can't take back, no matter how much money you have. Diana Carter stepped fully into the first-class cabin, her presence immediately changing the entire atmosphere. The other passengers, who had been watching the confrontation with growing discomfort, now sat in stunned silence. Victoria Reynolds stood frozen in the aisle, her mouth opening and closing as her brain tried to process what she was seeing. Mrs. Reynolds, Diana said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful executives. I understand you've been questioning my daughter's right to occupy seat 1A. Victoria's face had gone completely pale. Your daughter. Yes, Diana replied calmly. Jasmine Carter is my daughter. The young woman you've been harassing for the past hour because you decided she didn't look like she belonged in first class. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Victoria looked back and forth between Diana and Jasmine, the family resemblance now unmistakable. Both women shared the same intelligent eyes, the same composed demeanor, the same quiet strength that came from confidence rather than arrogance. I had no idea, Victoria stammered. No idea of what Diana asked, taking another step closer. That she was my daughter? Or that your behavior was completely inappropriate, regardless of who her parents are? Thomas Anderson was recording the conversation on his phone, his expression a mixture of amazement and horror. He had witnessed corporate meltdowns before, but nothing compared to what he was seeing now. Maria Gonzalez's live stream had exploded to over 150,000 viewers, with comments flooding in from around the world. The hashtag Justice at 30,000 feet was trending globally, and the story was already being picked up by major news outlets. Victoria tried to regain her composure. Ms. Carter, I was simply concerned about security protocols. Your daughter admitted she didn't pay for her ticket. She said she didn't pay for it personally. Diana corrected her tone, becoming dangerously quiet. Because it was purchased on our corporate account, just like hundreds of other tickets we buy annually for family members, executives, and employees. But she's just a student, Victoria protested weakly. She's a sophomore at MIT studying aviation logistics, Diana replied. She's also my daughter, my advisor on emerging technologies, and currently carrying confidential merger documents that will reshape this industry. Not that any of that matters. Victoria was grasping for any justification. She was dressed so casually. First class has certain expectations. Expectations? Diana's voice carried an edge now, such as, well, you know, presentation appearance, the kind of background that comes with serious money. The racist implications of Victoria's words hung heavy in the cabin. Several passengers audibly gasped. Thomas Anderson shook his head in disgust. Diana stepped even closer to Victoria, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Mrs. Reynolds, are you suggesting that black passengers need to meet different standards than white passengers to be acceptable in first class? No. Of course not, Victoria said quickly. This has nothing to do with race. Doesn't it? Diana asked. Because my daughter was sitting quietly studying, bothering no one. The only thing that triggered your hour-long harassment campaign was her appearance. So please explain to me and everyone watching what it was about her appearance that made you assume she didn't belong here. Victoria was trapped. Every possible answer would reveal the racist assumptions underlying her behavior. The cabin waited in tense silence for her response. It wasn't about race, Victoria said finally. It was about age and presentation. I see, Diana nodded. So you believe teenagers shouldn't fly first class? Not typically, no. Interesting, because we have detailed records of your flights, Mrs. Reynolds. Last year you flew first class with your own daughter who was 17 at the time. Did she not belong there either? Victoria's face flushed red. That's different. She was with family, and my daughter was traveling alone on family business, Diana replied smoothly. So the difference appears to be something other than age or family connections. Captain Rodriguez watched the exchange with professional concern. As an experienced pilot, she had seen her share of passenger conflicts, but this level of corporate involvement was unprecedented. The owner was personally handling a discrimination incident on her aircraft. Miguel Santos stood nearby, his years of customer service experience telling him this was a career-defining moment. How this situation was resolved would become part of Atlantic Elite Airways' legend, for better or worse. Victoria's customer service call was still connected, and the supervisor was frantically taking notes while corporate security recorded everything. This incident was already being escalated to the highest levels of the company's legal and public relations departments. Ms. Carter Victoria said, trying to project confidence she no longer felt, "I understand you're protective of your daughter. But I was following my instincts about suspicious activity." Suspicious activity, Diana repeated slowly. Such as, well, the way she was dressed, her age, the fact that she admitted not paying. Mrs. Reynolds, Diana interrupted. Let me share something with you. I built this airline from a small regional carrier into a global powerhouse. I've flown millions of passengers and I've learned to recognize many things. But do you know what I've never learned to recognize? Victoria waited nervously for the answer. I've never learned to recognize who belongs in first class based on their appearance, Diana continued, because the only qualification for first class is a valid ticket. Everything else is prejudice. The word prejudice hit Victoria like a physical blow. She could see her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Victoria said desperately. I'm a platinum member. I spend hundreds of thousands with this airline annually. Surely that counts for something. It did, Diana replied. Until you spent an hour harassing my daughter based on racist assumptions. It wasn't racist, Victoria protested. Then explain it, Diana challenged. Explain why a casually dressed black teenager triggered your security concerns, while casually dressed white teenagers you've flown with did not. Victoria was completely trapped. Any explanation she offered would only make her sound more racist. Jasmine had been sitting quietly during the entire exchange, but now she spoke for the first time since her mother's arrival. Mom? Jasmine said softly. I don't think Mrs. Reynolds meant any harm. She was acting on assumptions that our society has taught her. Victoria looked at Jasmine with surprise. After everything that had happened, the young woman was offering her an escape route. However, Jasmine continued those assumptions have consequences, and those consequences affect real people. Diana smiled proudly at her daughter's wisdom and composure. Jasmine is more generous than I am, but she's also right about consequences. Victoria sensed an opportunity for redemption. I apologize if I made you uncomfortable, Jasmine. I truly didn't mean any harm. Mrs. Reynolds, Diana said before Jasmine could respond, your apology is noted. But this incident goes beyond personal discomfort. What do you mean? Victoria asked nervously. I mean that your behavior on this flight has been recorded by multiple passengers. and is currently being live-streamed to hundreds of thousands of viewers worldwide, Diana explained. You've created a public relations situation that affects my airline's reputation. Victoria's face went white as she realized the full scope of what was happening. Her private complaint had become a global spectacle. More importantly, Diana continued, you've demonstrated a pattern of behavior that creates a hostile environment for other passengers. That's something I cannot tolerate. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. Ma'am, what are your instructions regarding Mrs. Reynolds's continued travel? Diana looked at Victoria with the expression that wasn't quite pity, but wasn't anger either. It was something worse, disappointment. Mrs. Reynolds, Diana said quietly, effective immediately, you are permanently banned from all Atlantic Elite Airways flights. Victoria's legs nearly gave out. You can't do that. I'm a paying customer. You were a paying customer, Diana corrected. Now you're a former customer. Your frequent flyer account has been terminated, your miles forfeited, and your name has been added to our no-fly list. This is discrimination, Victoria shouted. You can't ban white customers for complaining about security. Mrs. Reynolds, Diana said, her voice like ice. I'm not banning you for being white. I'm banning you for being racist. The word hung in the air like a verdict. Victoria looked around the cabin, desperately seeking support from other passengers. She found none. Every face showed disgust, embarrassment, or pity. Thomas Anderson spoke up. Ma'am, you brought this on yourself. Everyone here witnessed your behavior. Maria Gonzalez nodded, still live streaming. My viewers have been watching for over an hour. The evidence is overwhelming. Victoria made one final desperate attempt. I'll sue. This is discrimination against a loyal customer. Please do, Diana replied calmly. I look forward to showing a court the recordings of your hour-long harassment of a teenager based on racial assumptions. I'm confident any jury will find your case compelling. The sarcasm was devastating. Victoria realized that any legal action would only bring more public attention to her behavior and humiliate her further. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward with airport security officers who had boarded during the confrontation. Mrs. Reynolds, you need to gather your belongings and disembark immediately. Victoria looked at her expensive designer luggage in the overhead bin, then at the security officers waiting to escort her off the plane. Her privileged world was collapsing in real time. This isn't over, Victoria said weakly, but there was no conviction in her voice. Actually, Diana replied, it is over. Your behavior today has permanently ended your relationship with this airline. But more than that, it's provided a valuable lesson for my daughter and everyone watching. Victoria was escorted from the aircraft while other passengers watched in stunned silence. Her exit was swift and humiliating, her designer shoes clicking against the jet bridge as she disappeared from view. Once Victoria was gone, Diana turned to address the other first-class passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. This kind of behavior is not tolerated on Atlantic Elite Airways. The passengers burst into spontaneous applause. Thomas Anderson stood up. Ms. Carter, your daughter handled that situation with remarkable grace. You should be very proud. I am, Diana replied, looking at Jasmine with obvious love and admiration. She's taught me a lot about dignity under pressure. As Diana prepared to leave the aircraft, she paused next to Captain Rodriguez. Elena, I want this incident documented thoroughly. It's going to become part of our crew training program. Yes, ma'am, Captain Rodriguez replied. And ma'am, your daughter is a credit to your family. Diana smiled. She's a credit to herself. The aircraft finally pushed back from the gate, now running nearly an hour behind schedule. But as they began their journey to London, everyone in first class understood they had witnessed something extraordinary. Justice had been served at 30,000 feet, and it had been swift, decisive, and absolutely final. As Atlantic Elite Airways Flight 447 finally lifted off from Miami International Airport, the first-class cabin buzzed with quiet conversation about what everyone had just witnessed. Victoria Reynolds's empty seat 2A served as a stark reminder of how quickly privilege could be stripped away when confronted with consequences. Diana Carter had returned to the VIP lounge to continue her business meetings, but not before having a brief private conversation with her daughter. She kissed Jasmine's forehead and whispered, "I'm proud of how you handled yourself. You showed more class in 1 hour than that woman has shown in her entire life." Jasmine settled back into her seat, finally able to return to her studies. The merger documents that had seemed so important earlier now felt secondary to the lesson she had just lived through. Her mother's airline wasn't just a business. It was a platform for dignity and justice. Thomas Anderson unbuckled his seatbelt and moved to the empty seat across from Jasmine. "Do you mind if I sit here? I wanted to properly introduce myself after that incredible display of composure." "Of course," Jasmine replied, closing her laptop. "I'm sorry you had to witness all of that drama." "Are you kidding?" Thomas laughed. "That was the most satisfying thing I've seen in years. I've dealt with entitled executives my whole career, but I've never seen anyone face consequences that immediate and complete." Maria Gonzalez looked up from her phone where she was still monitoring the explosive reaction to her live stream. "Jasmine, you need to see this. The video has been shared over 1 million times in the past hour. People are calling you a hero." "I didn't do anything heroic," Jasmine said modestly. "I just refused to let someone else's prejudices define me." "That's exactly what made it heroic," Thomas replied. "You maintained your dignity while she destroyed hers. That takes incredible strength." Captain Rodriguez made an announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're now at cruising altitude. I want to personally apologize for the departure delay. However, I also want to commend our passengers for standing up against discrimination today. Atlantic Elite Airways has zero tolerance for harassment based on appearance, race, or any other personal characteristic." The passengers in first class applauded again. Miguel Santos approached with champagne service, his professional demeanor restored now that the crisis had passed. "Miss Carter," Miguel said, "I want to apologize for not intervening more forcefully earlier. That situation should never have continued as long as it did." "You were in an impossible position," Jasmine replied graciously. "Company policy protects passenger privacy, which meant you couldn't reveal my family connection. You handled it professionally." Rachel Moore, the junior flight attendant, approached nervously. "Miss Carter, I know I didn't speak up strongly enough. I was afraid of making the situation worse." Jasmine said gently, "You're still learning, but this experience shows why crew training needs to include bias recognition and intervention techniques." Miguel nodded thoughtfully. "That's an excellent point. Would you be willing to help develop that training?" "Absolutely," Jasmine replied. "This kind of incident shouldn't happen to anyone regardless of who their parents are." Thomas was scrolling through social media on his phone. "The reaction to this story is incredible. Justice at 30,000 feet is trending worldwide. News outlets are picking it up. What are they saying?" Maria asked, still live streaming to her audience. "Mostly positive," Thomas replied. "People are praising Jasmine's composure and Diana Carter's swift action, but there's also serious discussion about discrimination in premium travel services." Jasmine frowned slightly. "I hope this doesn't become just about my family. The real issue is bigger than one incident." "It is bigger," agreed Maria. "But sometimes it takes a personal story to make people understand universal problems." Miguel returned with refreshments for the first-class passengers, but the mood was more subdued than usual. Everyone was processing what they had witnessed. "Has anyone checked on what happened to Mrs. Reynolds after she left?" Rachel asked quietly. Thomas had been monitoring local news feeds. Airport security confirmed she was escorted from the terminal. Her connecting flights were canceled. "She's apparently stranded in Miami until she can find another airline." That's going to be difficult, Miguel observed. News of airline bans travels fast in this industry. Other carriers will be reluctant to book passengers with documented discrimination incidents. The conversation was interrupted by Miguel's radio crackling with a message from the cockpit. He listened for a moment, then approached Jasmine with a smile. "Miss Carter, we've received a message from corporate headquarters. Your mother wants you to know that the company's board of directors held an emergency meeting during our departure. They've unanimously approved new policies based on today's incident." "What kind of policies?" Jasmine asked. "Enhanced bias training for all crew members, mandatory intervention protocols for passenger harassment, and establishment of a passenger dignity board to review discrimination complaints," Miguel explained. Thomas was impressed. "That's remarkably fast corporate response." "My mother doesn't believe in waiting when it comes to doing the right thing," Jasmine replied. Maria looked up from her phone again. "There's more news. Several other airlines have announced they're reviewing their own anti-discrimination policies. This incident is triggering industry-wide changes. The ripple effects were already spreading beyond Atlantic Elite Airways." Social media was filled with stories from other passengers who had experienced similar discrimination, and civil rights organizations were calling for comprehensive reform in the airline industry. "It's amazing how one person's courage can create such widespread impact," Rachel observed. "It wasn't just my courage," Jasmine said. "All of you supported me. Thomas and Maria documented everything. Captain Rodriguez stood up to an aggressive passenger. Even Miguel found ways to help within policy constraints. But you set the tone," Thomas insisted. "You refused to be intimidated or to respond with anger. That's what made this powerful instead of just another ugly confrontation." Miguel's radio crackled again. This time, the message made him smile broadly. "Miss Carter, I have an update from ground operations in Miami." Mrs. Reynolds attempted to book flights with 3 other major airlines. All 3 declined her business after reviewing the incident footage. "She's been effectively blacklisted from commercial aviation," Thomas said, shaking his head. "That's a level of consequence most people never face." "It's a natural consequence," Jasmine corrected. "Airlines are businesses. They can't afford to alienate customers by allowing harassment of other passengers." The flight continued smoothly toward London, but the conversation kept returning to the broader implications of what had happened. Maria addressed her live-stream audience directly. "What we witnessed today wasn't just justice for one person. It was a demonstration that discrimination has real consequences when people are brave enough to document and confront it." Her comment sparked thousands of responses from viewers sharing their own experiences with discrimination and expressing hope that more institutions would respond as decisively as Atlantic Elite Airways had. Thomas was reading news coverage on his tablet. "The business press is fascinating. Stock analysts are calling this a masterclass in crisis management. Atlantic Elite's stock price has actually increased since the incident." Why Jasmine asked, curious about the business implications. "Because Diana Carter's response demonstrated strong leadership and clear values," Thomas explained. "Investors appreciate companies that stand behind their principles even when it costs them high-spending customers." Miguel brought updates throughout the flight. Corporate headquarters was fielding interview requests from major news outlets. Diana Carter would be appearing on several business shows to discuss the incident and the airline's response. "Your mother is turning this into a teaching moment for the entire industry," Miguel told Jasmine. "That sounds like her," Jasmine replied with a smile. "She's never missed an opportunity to push for positive change." As the flight neared London, passengers began preparing for landing. But the conversation in first class remained focused on the day's events and their broader meaning. Jasmine Thomas said as he gathered his belongings, "I want to give you my card. If you ever need support for diversity initiatives in the aviation industry, please call me." "Thank you," Jasmine replied. "I think we're going to need all the help we can get to create lasting change." Maria was preparing to end her live stream. To everyone who watched today, remember that change happens when good people refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice. Share your own stories. Support others when you see discrimination, and never underestimate the power of standing up for what's right. As the aircraft began its descent into London, Heathrow, Captain Rodriguez made a final announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our approach to London. I want to thank you again for your patience during today's unusual circumstances. You've all been witnesses to an important moment, one that I believe will make air travel more dignified for everyone. The landing was smooth, and as passengers disembarked, many stopped to speak with Jasmine. They thanked her for her courage, shared their own stories of discrimination, and promised to remember the lesson they had learned at 30,000 feet. Victoria Reynolds, meanwhile, was still stranded at Miami International Airport, frantically trying to find transportation to her destination. Her privileged world had crumbled in a single hour, and the rebuild would be long and humiliating. Justice had been swift, decisive, and absolutely final. And the story was just beginning to spread around the world. 6 months after that transformative flight, the aviation industry was still feeling the ripple effects of what became known as the Atlantic Elite incident. Diana Carter had kept her promise to turn one moment of discrimination into an engine for meaningful change across the entire industry. Jasmine Carter stood at the podium of the International Aviation Ethics Summit in Geneva, addressing an audience of airline executives, civil rights leaders, and policymakers from around the world. At 19, she had become the youngest person ever to deliver a keynote address at the prestigious gathering. 6 months ago, I was just a college student trying to study on a flight to London. Jasmine began her voice carrying the same quiet strength that had served her so well in first class that day. I had no idea that refusing to accept discrimination would spark a global conversation about dignity in travel. The audience of over 2,000 industry leaders listened intently as Jasmine shared the lessons learned from her experience. What happened to me wasn't unique, she continued. It was simply documented. Every day passengers face assumptions, harassment, and exclusion based on their appearance. The only difference in my case was that my mother owned the airline and had the power to respond immediately. Diana Carter sat in the front row beaming with pride as her daughter addressed some of the most powerful people in global aviation. The real victory wasn't one woman being banned from flying, Jasmine said. The real victory is that 17 major airlines have now implemented the dignity charter that my mother developed. The real victory is that crew members receive bias training and have protocols for intervention. The real victory is that passengers now have clear channels for reporting discrimination. The numbers were impressive. In the 6 months since the incident, documented discrimination complaints across participating airlines had dropped by 60%, while passenger satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. Thomas Anderson, who had become a vocal advocate for aviation equity, was also in the audience. His venture capital firm now specifically invested in diversity-focused aviation technologies, and he credited Jasmine's example with inspiring his new mission. But the most important lesson Jasmine continued isn't about corporate policies or industry standards. It's about the power of individual courage. Every person on that flight had a choice about how to respond to discrimination. Some chose to record it, some chose to speak up, and some chose to stay silent. The collective choice of good people to stand against injustice is what created change. As Jasmine concluded her speech, the audience rose for a sustained standing ovation. But she wasn't finished with her message. To everyone watching this speech online, I want you to know that you have the same power those passengers had. The next time you witness discrimination, harassment, or injustice, you have a choice. You can document it, speak against it, or stay silent. Your choice matters more than you know. The summit concluded with the announcement of the Jasmine Carter Aviation Equity Fund, a $50 million initiative to promote diversity and inclusion throughout the industry. Half the funding came from Diana Carter's company, while the other half was contributed by airlines investors and individual donors inspired by the story. Victoria Reynolds, meanwhile, had largely disappeared from public view. The woman who once commanded attention at elite social gatherings now avoided public spaces where she might be recognized. Her husband had quietly filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and public embarrassment. Her children, attending college on the East Coast, rarely took her calls. The viral videos of her behavior had made her unemployable in her social circles. Country clubs had quietly revoked her membership. Charity boards had asked her to step down. The woman who once judged others based on appearance now understood what it felt like to be excluded and ostracized. She had attempted to rebuild her reputation with public apologies and diversity training, but the damage was too extensive. Her story became a cautionary tale about the permanent consequences of racist behavior in the digital age. But the focus of this story isn't on punishment or revenge. It's on progress and inspiration. Maria Gonzalez had leveraged her viral live stream into a career as a social justice advocate and documentary filmmaker. Her follow-up documentary, Dignity at 30,000 Feet, won 3 Emmy Awards and sparked congressional hearings on discrimination in public accommodation. Captain Elena Rodriguez became Atlantic Elite Airways' Director of Crew Excellence, implementing the bias intervention training that was now standard across the industry. Her work became a model for other airlines struggling to address discrimination complaints. Miguel Santos was promoted to Director of Passenger Experience, where he developed the protocols that transformed how crew members respond to harassment incidents. His training program had been adopted by over 40 airlines worldwide. Even Rachel Moore, the junior flight attendant who had been uncertain about how to respond, became a leader in crew education. Her honesty about feeling unprepared to intervene had led to the creation of specific intervention training for all airline employees. The story that began with one person's prejudice had become a catalyst for industry transformation, legal reform, and social change. But at its heart, it remained a simple truth about human dignity. If you followed this remarkable journey from beginning to end, you now understand that this isn't just a story about airlines or first-class travel. This is a story about the choices we make when confronted with injustice. Jasmine Carter never raised her voice, never fought back with anger, never sought revenge. She simply refused to accept that someone else's prejudices could define her worth. Her quiet strength turned a moment of discrimination into a movement for change. Diana Carter didn't just ban one discriminatory passenger. She used her platform and resources to create lasting reforms that protect all travelers from harassment and exclusion. The other passengers didn't just watch silently. They documented injustice, spoke truth to power, and created the accountability that made change possible. The next time you witness discrimination, remember this story. You have more power than you think. Your phone can document injustice and create accountability. Your voice can speak up for those being targeted. Your support can make the difference between someone standing alone and standing with allies. Your shared story can inspire others to act with courage. Share your own stories in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed discrimination? How did you respond? What would you do differently? Subscribe to this channel if you believe that dignity belongs to everyone, regardless of how they look, where they come from, or what they wear. Hit that like button if this story moved you and you want to see more stories of justice prevailing over prejudice. Hit that notification bell for more stories that prove justice isn't just possible, it's inevitable when good people choose courage over comfort. And please share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because these stories save lives and change hearts. Victoria Reynolds paid the ultimate price for her prejudice. But that's not the point of this story. The point is that Jasmine Carter, Diana Carter, and everyone who supported them proved that quiet dignity defeats loud prejudice every single time. Class isn't about your ticket price, your designer clothes, or your bank account. Class is about your character, your treatment of others, and your choice to stand up for what's right. The next time someone tries to tell you that you don't belong somewhere, remember Jasmine Carter. Remember that your worth isn't determined by other people's assumptions. Remember that dignity doesn't need permission to exist. And remember that when justice prevails at 30,000 feet, it proves that justice can prevail anywhere. Until next time, choose kindness, choose courage, and never underestimate the power of treating every person with the respect they deserve. Because in the end, that's not just good policy, it's good humanity. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being part of the change this world desperately needs. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends and family. Your support helps us continue telling stories that matter and spreading messages of hope and justice around the world.